The killing fields is a phrase that has come to mean mass killings and deaths by starvation that took place at the hand of the communist regime in Cambodia between 1975 and 1979. The name arose from the many deaths which took place literally in the fields of Cambodia. Overall, at least 1.5 million people were killed or starved to death. These deaths were a higher proportion of the population than that of all the other purges and periods of starvation in other communist regimes in the 20th century. Between 21 and 24% of the population is estimated to have died. The Communist Party in Cambodia was known as the Khmer Rouge. Khmer was a reference to the ancient Khmer kingdom which ruled over the region, and Rouge, French for red, reflected the party's communist ideology. The Khmer Rouge initially grew out of the Viet Minh, a communist movement in Vietnam which sought the expulsion of French occupiers not just from Vietnam but from Cambodia and Laos too. Consequently, Cambodians were allowed to join, including the man who became the leader of the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot. With continued Viet Minh support, and, more crucially, support from the Chinese Communist Party, the Cambodian Communist Party grew and formed its own distinct independence movement. On 18 March 1969, the USA began bombing part of Cambodia close to Vietnam in an attempt to destroy a route used by North Vietnamese Communist forces to infiltrate South Vietnam. It was known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail after the leader of the North Vietnamese government. The bombing caused thousands of Cambodian casualties, which increased support for the Khmer Rouge. Cambodia at that time was ruled by Prince Sihanouk. Under Sihanouk's leadership, the French had granted Cambodia internal autonomy in 1946, but refused to grant them full independence. Low-level conflict erupted as a result, and, due to both this conflict and France's defeat in neighboring Vietnam, the French relinquished sovereignty over Cambodia in 1953. After the Geneva Conference of 1954, mediated by Switzerland, France formally recognized Cambodian independence. But in 1970, Sihanouk was deposed in a right-wing coup led by the nationalist and anti-communist Prime Minister, Lon Nol. The Khmer Rouge opposed Sihanouk for his autocratic and feudalistic rule. But after Sihanouk was deposed, the Khmer Rouge formed an alliance of convenience with him against the new government. The prince was popular with the peasants, and the alliance increased the number of Khmer Rouge troops from 6,000 to 50,000. Pol Pot led a military campaign against the new government. Much of the initial fighting was done by North Vietnamese troops resisting Lon Nol's attempts to cut off their route through Cambodia into South Vietnam. During this phase, the Khmer Rouge was largely an auxiliary force supporting the Vietnamese. It lacked the equipment and manpower to fight a conventional war against Lon Nol's forces, which were backed by the United States. But as the war progressed, the Khmer Rouge recruited thousands more followers. It boosted its popularity among the peasantry by promising to redistribute land and wealth. It promised to do away with feudalistic and corrupt practices that had been in place for generations. A rift opened up between the Chinese-backed Khmer Rouge and the Soviet-backed North Vietnamese. The Khmer Rouge began to resent North Vietnamese influence in Cambodia. In 1973, a temporary ceasefire was agreed between North and South Vietnam at the Paris Peace Accords. Lon Nol wanted to follow suit with a ceasefire between the Cambodian government on the one hand and the forces of the North Vietnamese and the Khmer Rouge on the other. The depth of the rift between the Khmer Rouge and North Vietnam became apparent when North Vietnam accepted the deal, but the Khmer Rouge refused to sign it and continued fighting. By 1975, the war against Lon Nol's government was being fought almost exclusively by the Khmer Rouge, which had grown in strength to the point of being able to mount conventional attacks with tanks and artillery captured from the government or supplied by Vietnam or China. After fierce fighting, the Khmer Rouge finally captured Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia, entering the city on 17 April 1975. Lon Nol fled the country and the government forces surrendered. Khmer Rouge soldiers went into the homes of residents and ordered them at gunpoint to vacate their homes at gunpoint and leave the city immediately. It was an extraordinary event, with thousands of people leaving with whatever belongings they could carry, not knowing where they were going to be made to go. To the phrase, the killing fields, Dith Pran, one of the minority who escaped, reported some of the horrific treatment. People's fingernails were pulled out. Their heads were forced into barrels of water. Some were buried alive with only their heads showing. A pot was then placed over their head, around which a fire was set, effectively roasting their heads while they were still alive. Babies were thrown onto bayonets or their feet hit on tree stumps. The Khmer Rouge are also known to have bludgeoned victims to death with pickaxes as it was cheaper than shooting them. The killings by the Khmer Rouge seem extreme, and they were. Part of the explanation is that its members viewed people as being of two sorts. Cambodians from agricultural or forested regions who, prior to the Khmer Rouge takeover in 1975, either owned no land at all, or very little, were referred to base, or old, people. This was the core demographic that the Khmer Rouge sought to cultivate. New people initially meant city dwellers who, prior to 1975, had worked for the police, army, CIA or the Lon Nol regime in any capacity. However, in practice anyone who came from a city, and therefore outside of the Khmer Rouge's sphere of influence prior to 1975, was considered a new person. New people were seen as less reliable, and a constant source of potential threat to the Khmer Rouge regime, due to their potential links with the Lon Nol government and perceived anti-communist stance. The new people were often blamed for wider failures of the Khmer Rouge regime. For example, food shortages that resulted from the collectivization of farms might instead be blamed on sabotage conducted by new people. The Khmer Rouge viewed the new people as entirely expendable and of little worth. Old or base people were encouraged to resent new people for their relative wealth, education and loyalty to the Lon Nol regime, whether this was true or not. In addition to the persecution of new people, the Khmer Rouge also targeted people from different ethnic backgrounds, particularly ethnic Vietnamese, as well as Buddhists and Muslims. Any religious belief which might compete with a person's loyalty to the Khmer Rouge regime was seen as threat, and ethnic Vietnamese civilians were considered a threat due to their potential loyalty towards the North Vietnamese government. The Khmer Rouge described their killing in terms of farming and agriculture. Those executed were said to have shared 2 meters of rice paddy, or having been sent to make fertilizer. The Khmer Rouge saw these killings as having a dual purpose. They removed subversives and enriched the earth. To begin with, the killing of city dwellers turned agricultural laborers, and those foraging for food, was often ad hoc and depended on individual Khmer soldiers or junior local commanders. But as the regime began to strengthen its grip, the killing became less arbitrary. Concentration camps were established. The most notorious was Tuol Sleng, based in the buildings and grounds of a former high school. It housed up to 20,000 inmates between 1976 and 1979. It contained 1,000 and 1,500 inmates at any one time. They were subjected to torture, starvation and medical experiments. They were forced to inform on their family and friends who were, in turn, arrested and imprisoned in the camp. Then they were executed. Only 12 people are known to have survived incarceration at Tuol Sleng. The Khmer Rouge claimed to treat all races equally, but there was a racial and ethnic aspect to some of the killings. A third of the ethnic Cham population in Cambodia perished between 1975 and 1979 as a result of executions, imprisonment without proper care and starvation. Cham villages were broken up and their inhabitants displaced to prevent large gatherings that might foster opposition to the regime. In some case, the Khmer Rouge massacred entire villages. The Chams were targeted because they both spoke a different language and were Muslims. The leaders considered Islam alien and unsuitable for the new revolutionary country. From 1977 or perhaps earlier, the Khmer Rouge launched raids into North Vietnamese territory. It pursued defectors and perceived dissidents across the border. Pol Pot feared that the North Vietnamese might retaliate and invade Cambodia. So he attempted to seize the initiative by launching a full-scale invasion of North Vietnam in 1978. However, Khmer Rouge forces made little headway against the experienced and well-equipped Vietnamese troops. The North Vietnamese pursued the Khmer Rouge back into Cambodia and went on to seize Phnom Penh in 1979. The loss of the capital forced the Khmer government to retreat into the forests and mountains of Cambodia. The Khmer Rouge continued to fight a sporadic guerrilla for 2 more decades, but it had been defeated. Vietnamese-backed Cambodian governments then ruled the country. Pol Pot officially stepped down as leader of the Khmer Rouge in 1985, although he continued to be a popular and influential figure within the party. Years of guerrilla war and a resulting steady erosion of support led to the decline of the party in the later 1980s and early 1990s. The last Khmer Rouge leader, Ta Mok, surrendered in 1999. The total death toll under the Khmer Rouge regime was between 1.67 and 1.87 million people, according to the estimates of Professor Ben Kiernan of Yale University. These were a result of either execution or starvation. Of these deaths, it is estimated that up to 60% were the result of executions directly carried out by the regime. Craig Etchison, a researcher at the Documentation Center of Cambodia, has mapped over 20,000 grave pits and suggests that the total number of deaths could be as high as 3 million. More than 20,438 mass grave pits have been discovered across Cambodia, the largest of which is Chung Ek, which is now a memorial site. A Buddhist stupa, a place of meditation, was erected in 1988 and filled with thousands of human skulls to remind people of the horror that occurred. Pol Pot died in 1998 at the age of 73, and was never tried for his crimes. His official cause of death was listed as heart failure. However, the journalist Nate Thayer, who was present at the time of Pol Pot's death, claimed that the former dictator committed suicide upon learning that his political rival, Ta Mok, was going to hand him over to the United States for trial. In 2006, a genocide tribunal was set up by the Cambodian government with the assistance of the United Nations. It convicted Nguyen Chi, the second in command of the Khmer Rouge, of war crimes and crimes against humanity in 2014. He was given a life sentence. Kong Kyu Lu, the director of Tuol Sleng, was convicted of crimes against humanity in 2010 and was also given a life sentence.
Thanks for watching.